Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? Like you're standing right next to someone but might as well be on the other side of the world? Saint Teresa of Avila saw something during her years of prayer that most married people never talk about but live every single day. She witnessed what happens to the souls of husbands and wives who sleep in the same bed but exist in completely separate universes. And what she saw was not beautiful. Teresa was born in 1515 in Avila, Spain. By 1535, she had entered the Carmelite convent of the Incarnation. For 27 years, she lived there among 150 nuns in a place that was more social club than monastery. The rules were loose. Visitors came and went. Nuns kept their own apartments. Teresa herself spent years leaving the convent to visit friends, attending parties, enjoying long conversations that fed her vanity more than her soul. She was charming, witty, loved by everyone, and she was dying inside. That moment marked the beginning of what she would later call her second conversion. From that point forward, God began showing her things. Visions, locutions, terrors, graces. And among those visions were scenes of marriage that no one talks about in wedding homilies. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual using sources from Teresa's own autobiography, The Life of Teresa of Jesus, completed in 1565 and examined by multiple theologians, including the Dominican friar Domingo Bañez, and The Interior Castle, written in 1577 at the direct command of her confessor, Father Geronimo Grecian. These are not later hagiographies. These are her own words, written under obedience, examined during the Inquisition, and preserved in manuscripts held at the Escorial Library outside Madrid. Now back to the information. They were from a noble family. They attended Mass together. From the outside, their life looked perfectly ordered. 2 children, a house with servants, debts managed, appearances maintained. But inside that house, Teresa saw something else. The wife stood in another room directing a servant. Between them, 15 paces of hallway. Neither spoke, neither looked for the other. They had not touched in months. They had not argued in weeks. There was no hatred, no shouting, no violence. Just a vast, polite silence. She could see his thoughts. He was thinking about a land transaction, about the dowry still owed for his daughter, about whether he should attend a council meeting that evening. His wife existed in his mind the way a chair exists, present, functional, requiring no attention. Sister, 3 days earlier. Her husband appeared in her thoughts only as an obstacle or an absence. She felt relief when he left the house. She felt nothing when he returned. Each one had become a separate island, and the space between them was filling with a cold, silent water that neither of them wanted to cross anymore. It was not tempting them toward adultery or violence. It was simply standing there, content, doing nothing, because it did not need to do anything. The separation was already complete. I am not there. Father Bañez told her it was. Marriage, he explained, is not a legal contract that survives on autopilot. It is a sacrament, which means it is a living conduit of grace. But grace requires participation. It requires acts of the will. When a husband and wife stop choosing one another, stop serving one another, stop praying for and with one another, the sacrament does not disappear legally, but it stops functioning spiritually. The channel closes. The grace that should flow between them dries up. And into that dryness, small demons come to make sure it stays dry. They were tough people, but somewhere in all that survival, they had stopped looking at each other. Each angel attended its own soul, but there was no shared work, no shared mission, no shared love. The marriage had become 2 parallel lives that happened to share expenses. Because when a man and a woman stop being vulnerable with each other, when they stop confessing their struggles to each other, when they stop asking each other for forgiveness, they begin to seek comfort elsewhere. Not always in another person's bed, sometimes in work, sometimes in wine, sometimes in the admiration of others, sometimes just in distraction, in noise, in the constant motion that keeps them from having to sit in a room together and face the fact that they are lonely. Continuum, which draws on decades of archival work, including letters Teresa wrote to her confessors that were not widely translated until the late 20th century. Now back to the information. She writes about this in letters to several women who came to her for spiritual direction. One letter, dated March 1572, is preserved in the Carmelite archives in Seville. A woman wrote to Teresa describing her marriage. Her husband was a good man. He provided. He did not drink. He did not beat her. But he did not speak to her except to give instructions. He did not ask about her day. He did not pray with her. He came to her bed once a month out of duty, finished quickly, and turned to face the wall. People see a husband and wife standing together and assume all is well. But you and I know that 2 people can stand side by side and be completely alone. The question is not whether you can change him. The question is whether you are willing to be the first one to break the silence. First, pray for your husband by name every day, out loud if possible, in his hearing. Let him know he is being lifted to God. Second, ask him one question every evening, not about tasks, not about money, about him, how he is, what he thought, what worried him. And then be quiet and let him answer or not answer. Do this every single day. Third, touch him, not sexually, just touch. A hand on his shoulder when you pass. A hand on his arm when you speak. The body remembers what the mind forgets. Act like it is true, and grace will begin to move. And here's the thing Teresa saw that most people miss. The demons do not need to push you apart. They just need to keep you busy, keep you tired, keep you slightly annoyed, keep you focused on everything except the one person you promised to love until death. The demon in the hallway was not dramatic. It was just standing there, making sure neither person took the first step. Teresa saw one more vision that she wrote about in a letter to her brother Lorenzo in 1576. This one involved a couple in their 70s. They had been married for 52 years. 52 years. They had raised 7 children, buried 2, built a successful fabric trade. Everyone respected them. And they had not had a real conversation in over a decade. The wife stared at her plate. The husband stared out the window. They chewed, they swallowed, they wiped their mouths, they stood, they walked to separate rooms. And Teresa writes, I saw that death was near for both of them, and I wept because I understood they were going to stand before God having spent 52 years together and arriving as strangers. And the answer she received was, they will not be condemned for hatred because there was no hatred. They will not be condemned for adultery because there was none. But they will be asked, what did you do with the sacrament I gave you? And they will have no answer. They survived, they managed, they coexisted, but they did not love. A museum. Do not let it become a monument to what it used to be. Fight for it. Not with arguments, fight with attention, fight with presence, fight with a decision every single morning to see your wife as if you're meeting her for the first time. But she also knew that many marriages failed not because of cruelty, but because of neglect. And neglect, she wrote, is a quiet poison. It does not announce itself. It just slowly drains the life out of something until one day you wake up and realize you're living with a ghost. The wife, moved by a sermon on the wounds of Christ, went home and asked her husband to pray the rosary with her. He refused the first night. She asked again the second night. He said he was tired. She asked again the third night. He sighed and agreed. Within 2 months, they were praying the full rosary together every night before bed. And Teresa writes, I saw in prayer that the demon in the hallway was gone, not because they had defeated it with some dramatic exorcism, but because there was no more space for it. They had begun to cross the distance. They had begun to be present to each other. And presence, she wrote, is the weapon against the demon of indifference. Teresa founded 17 convents between 1567 and 1582. She traveled over 6,000 miles on roads that were barely roads, in heat, in rain, in winter cold that cracked the skin on her hands. She was investigated by the Inquisition 3 separate times. She wrote 5 major books and over 450 letters. She died in October 1582 in Alba de Tormes, exhausted, sick, and completely at peace. But among all the things she wrote about, prayer, contemplation, mystical union, demonic attacks, the vision of the indifferent marriage stayed with her. She mentioned it in conversation with her nuns frequently. One nun, Maria de San Jose, recorded that Teresa said near the end of her life, if I could go back, I would spend more time talking to married people, because the monastery protects you from certain temptations. But marriage puts you in the fire every single day. And most people are not taught how to stay in that fire without burning out. Because the saddest thing I have seen in this life is 2 people who promised forever and then spent that forever in separate rooms. The remedy was this, 15 minutes every single day, sitting in the same room. No tasks, no distractions, no children, no servants. Just the 2 of them facing each other and one of them asking, how is your soul today? Teresa writes, if a husband and wife would do this every day for 1 year, I do not think there's a marriage that could not be saved, short of one involving true malice or danger. But almost no one will do it, because it requires vulnerability, and vulnerability feels like weakness. So they choose distance, which feels like strength, but is actually death. The last letter Teresa wrote about marriage was dated August 1582, 2 months before she died. A young woman had written asking whether she should enter the convent or accept a marriage proposal from a man her family had chosen. Teresa's response was unusually direct. She writes, do not enter the convent to escape marriage, and do not enter marriage to escape loneliness. Both are vocations that require everything. But if you choose marriage, know this. The first year you will be in love, the second year you will be adjusting, the third year you will be tested, and from the 4th year onward you will have to choose, every single day, whether you are building a union or maintaining an arrangement. Most people choose the arrangement because it is easier, but arrangements do not get you to heaven. Unions do. She ends the letter with a line that her nuns quoted for years afterward. She writes, a marriage without daily conversation is a body without a soul. It still moves, it still functions, but it is not alive. Among them was a woman named Catalina de Tolosa, who had been married for 38 years. She testified that in 1578 she had gone to Teresa in despair. Her marriage was not violent, but it was cold. Her husband spoke to her only to give orders. They had not shared a meal in months. She told Teresa she felt like she was disappearing. Catalina testified that Teresa looked at her for a long time and then said, "You are not disappearing. You are being tested. And the test is this: will you love him even when he does not love you back? Not with feelings. Feelings are not in your control, but with actions, with service, with respect, with the decision to see him as Christ sees him, which is as a man who is also struggling, also lonely, also afraid." Catalina said she followed Teresa's advice. She began praying for her husband by name every morning. She began asking him one question every night. She began touching his shoulder when she spoke. For 6 months, nothing changed. He barely looked at her, but she did not stop. She said, "Then start now." Near the end, she says something that connects directly to Teresa's vision. She writes, "I believe that when a marriage dies from indifference, it is not because the people are bad. It is because they are tired, and the enemy of our souls knows that tired people do not fight. They just give up quietly, and that is the saddest victory he can win." In 1622, 40 years after Teresa's death, a Carmelite nun named Ana de San Bartolome, who had been Teresa's nurse and companion during the last years of her life, wrote a memoir. In it, she describes a conversation that happened 3 weeks before Teresa died. They were in a convent in Alba de Tormes. Teresa was weak, in pain, struggling to eat. Ana was sitting beside her, praying. Teresa opened her eyes and said, "I have been thinking about the married people I have known." And Ana asked, "What about them?" Teresa said, "Most of them think the problem is the other person. The husband thinks, if only my wife were different. The wife thinks, if only my husband would change. But the real problem is simpler. They stopped being curious about each other." Ana writes that Teresa paused, took a breath, and then said, "When you stop being curious about someone, you stop loving them. Because love is not a feeling you fall into. It is attention you choose to give. And when you stop paying attention, the person becomes invisible. And we are very good at living with invisible people." Teresa said, "You ask questions you have never asked. You notice things you stop noticing. You thank them for things you take for granted. You do not assume you know them completely. Because the truth is, people change. Every year, every suffering, every grace changes them. And if you are not paying attention, you will wake up one day married to a stranger." It sits in the archives of the Discalced Carmelites in Rome, catalog numbered Teresian Manuscripts, volume 12, pages 83 through 91. Almost no one references it, but that conversation, 3 weeks before Teresa's death, might be the clearest summary of everything she saw about marriage. Indifference is not neutral. It is a choice to stop seeing. And when you stop seeing someone, you cannot love them. You can only manage them. There is an arquebus ball lodged in the wall of a chapel in Avila. It was fired during a siege in 1521, 4 years before Teresa entered the convent. The ball is still there. You can see it if you visit. It sits 2 inches into the stone, stuck, never removed. Teresa used to pray in that chapel, and she once told a nun that the ball reminded her of indifference in marriage. It does not kill you in one shot. It just lodges itself in the wall of your life, and you learn to live with it. You walk past it every day. You stop noticing it, but it is still there, a piece of violence you have made normal. Married women. Most of them were never published. They are fragile, written in faded brown ink, some of them torn, some of them repaired with thread. One letter, dated October 1579, 3 years before her death, is addressed to a woman whose name has been blacked out, but the content is clear. She and her husband had been living as strangers for 5 years. She said she had tried everything. She had prayed, she had confessed, she had asked him to talk. He refused. She was exhausted. She wanted to know if it was acceptable to simply give up trying and live the rest of her life in polite coexistence. Because you are not just living with a man. You are living with a soul that Christ died for. And if you give up on him, you are telling Christ that his sacrifice was not enough to make your marriage worth fighting for. I know you're tired. I know he is difficult. But the question is not whether he deserves your effort. The question is whether you believe that grace is stronger than human stubbornness. Because I am telling you, it is. But grace does not move without your participation. You are the hands of God in that house. Act like it. She was declared a doctor of the church in 1970, the first woman to receive that title. Over 450 of her letters survive. 5 major books, testimonies from hundreds of people who knew her. And buried in all of that is a vision almost no one talks about. The vision of a marriage that was not abusive, not adulterous, not dramatic, just empty. And the demon who stood in the hallway, content because emptiness needs no maintenance. And most of them think they are the only ones losing. But what God intends is that they join their deaths. Every day, you must die to your own will in small ways. You must die to your preference about where to eat, how to spend money, how to raise children. And in those small deaths, if you allow grace to work, something is born that neither of you could have created alone. They build walls, they keep private spaces their spouse can never enter, and in doing so, they starve the marriage. Because a marriage cannot survive on whatever is left over after you have protected yourself. Teresa's answer was recorded by multiple nuns. She would say, You are not dying to yourself for him. You are dying to yourself for Christ. Your husband is simply the person God has chosen to be the chisel. And yes, it will hurt. Yes, it will feel unfair, but you are not keeping score. You are becoming holy. She writes in a letter dated April 15, 75, "If your husband is cruel, you must protect yourself and your children. But if your husband is simply distant, simply cold, that is not grounds for separation. That is grounds for spiritual warfare. You pull it up, it feels empty, but you keep lowering it, because eventually the bucket comes up full. If you are giving everything and your husband is becoming more selfish, more cruel, that is enabling. You must stop. But if you see even the smallest signs of softening, that is holy suffering. That is the cross that leads to resurrection." Teresa wrote back and told her to stop performing. Instead, every night before bed, go to him and say, "I'm going to pray for you now. What should I ask God to give you?" Within 3 years, she wrote that her marriage was completely new. Fifth dwelling place, prayer of union. She describes how the soul loses awareness of itself and becomes absorbed in God. Then she writes, "This is what marriage is supposed to be. Two people so absorbed in loving each other and loving God that they forget to keep score. So that one person has to decide, will I keep giving even if I am the only one?" A wife gets hurt. She closes her heart. The husband feels the coldness. He withdraws. She feels it. She closes more. He withdraws more. Within a year, same house, same bed, completely alone. Teresa called this the spiral of silence. The only way to break it is for one person to take the risk of opening first, even if it means getting hurt again. Teresa was investigated for her teachings on prayer. One charge was that she encouraged women to disobey their husbands by prioritizing prayer over household duties. And if they treat each other like roles instead of souls, they will die inside long before their bodies stop breathing. Died. She was in Burgos. A young couple came to see her. Married 6 months, already struggling. The husband wanted children immediately. The wife wanted to wait. They were not fighting, but tension filled every conversation. It means giving up the need to be right so that you can be close. But because appreciation was killing bitterness before it hardened into resentment, Teresa told them, keep doing it for the rest of your lives. Because bitterness grows faster than love. You have to water love every single day or it dies. 41 years, we said, one thing we appreciated. Some nights it was hard, but we did it, and I believe that is why we made it. Almost none know about the demon in the hallway. Almost none know about the letters to women drowning in loneliness while living with another human being. And most of them think they're the only ones losing.